Go for it. Shall we get started then?
Yes, please.
Great. So thank everybody. Good afternoon or good morning to those who are joining us from across the pond. Today's panel, COVID-19, what is next for the workplace? So myself and Nina Robison will be your hosts. I'm Director of Insights Business Psychology and co-founder of Inspiration North. Nina is Head of Practice in HR for MacGregor, the talent partner. Our panel today, we have Graeme Boylen, HR Director of Tarmac. We have Rob Baker, Positive Psychologist and founder and Chief Positive Deviant of Tailored Thinking. And we've got Michelle Minnikin, founder of Insights Business Psychology and a Chartered Psychologist. So just to run through, we will be going until 1 o'clock. We have 3 key questions, about 10 minutes per question to the panel, which my host Nina will be asking. If, as we go through this, you have got any questions, please put them in the chat and we can then ask those directly to keep the conversation going. Perhaps I can ask everybody as well, if you could mute your microphone so we can avoid the Amazon deliveries and dogs, cats and washing machines in the background. That would be fantastic. Have I missed anything, Michelle? Nina, have I missed anything?
I don't think so.
Fabulous. So shall we get cracking
Let's
then?
go. Welcome everybody. Lovely to see everyone. I hope everybody's well, given the current situation. So first question, I'm going to kick off straight away. Graeme, do you want to go first? How do we think coronavirus has changed the world of work?
I mean, clearly significantly more than everyone. We're in a situation at the moment where I think every day we're all discovering something new, and we're all kind of heading somewhere without a map, which is quite interesting. It certainly keeps my life very interesting. Very clearly, the obvious things are that travel has dropped incredibly, particularly for those who have national or international roles. Staying in hotels has virtually disappeared, certainly in my business, and I'm sure in many others. And it kind of leads you to start thinking about the future straight away. I know that's not the question it's about right now. Right now, we've all just embraced technology and we've got on with it, and we've started working in a way that's much more flexible than I think any of us imagined was possible, actually. Sure, I think, you know, like many of you, I'd used Teams before and a fair bit, but I'll probably use it more now in a day than I had previously every quarter. So it's just been it's been a forced move, which has meant that we've probably moved on in terms of the way that we work in a flexible way, in a trusted way. I think trust's a really important word at the moment. Something like 3 to 5 years in 2 to 3 months. So it's an incredible leap in the way that we all think, act, and behave, and in particular, as I say, kind of trust our teams. Not having people around you is quite different. When you go to any head office, you tend to spend time at the coffee machine over lunch, have a sandwich, a coffee, and you have some quite different conversations to the ones that you do in meetings. And they've largely disappeared, actually. And there's a regret around that in that I think we're slightly less sociable, but some of that started to be replaced by quiz evenings and getting together on Teams for a glass of wine on an evening and all that kind of stuff, which I think is actually really helpful. But during the working day, having cut all of that stuff out, we've actually become incredibly more efficient in the way that we do things. A very simple example from me would be in normal course of events within our business. And our business is quite a large business. We've got a turnover of about 2.7 billion. We employ about 8,500 people in the UK. So we have a monthly board meeting, and normally that is 9 in the morning, usually scheduled till 5 at night, normally finishes about 7. And then we go straight to dinner and carry on talking. That's now been replaced with usually a Teams meeting for 2 hours. So it forces you to look at what's important and talk about the things that actually move the dial for your own business. So that efficiency piece for me is really important. But we have lost something around the human side and social side. So getting that balance moving forward for me is an important aspiration. And at that point, I'll shut up because I can talk all day about it.
Mhm.
Thank you, Graeme. Michelle?
So yeah, echoing what Graeme's saying. So I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective. So I'm working with a number of organisations on different projects that are not necessarily coronavirus related. And, you know, there's almost two camps that I'm noticing. So there's those who are, that are really struggling, and then those that are really thriving. And it's really interesting to see some of the ones that are really thriving and taking a leadership position aren't necessarily the ones that were leaders, you know, official leaders in the first place. We've got a really good example of one chap who, you know, who would have before this been thought of as the world's worst micromanager, and he was very hard on his staff, and you know, people didn't necessarily love working for him. They had a lot of respect for him, very bright chap, but he was a bit of a hard boss to have. And within a day of this happening, he was Teams every morning. We're going to have, you know, half an hour, come if you want to come along, let's actually check we're all okay. And almost everyone was like, what what is this is not what we were expecting. We were expecting to be micromanaged. And, you know, he was very pragmatic about it. It's almost do what you can, you know, come to me if you've got problems. You know, very aware that most of his team were female mothers, with you know, children of various ages, and it was a real surprise to everybody. But I think he's got some really good capital, I suppose, moving forward, because now people really want to, you know, perform for him, which we could never in a million years have predicted that. So I am seeing a lot more compassion, a lot more leaders sort of dialing down that, or will have to be always professional at work as well. So being a lot more human. So that is really, really heartening. But work and home life's totally blurred. So I'm almost loving being able to see, you know, I'm really nosy, you know, through the keyhole is like fun for me. Seeing everybody's houses and you know, meeting people on a more of a sort of a human to human level. And, you know, seeing everyone's cats and dogs, I'm loving it because, you know, humans are fun for me. So what about you, Rob? What have you noticed?
So I think that's a really interesting point. So probably two things that jumped out at me in terms of my experience of supporting individuals. So you, Michelle, similar to yourself, I spend a lot of time working with organisations rather than the inside, and I think that's why I'm fascinated by kind of Graeme, because of insight that he's got can give us as well. But from my perspective, there's kind of two things that I suppose that I'm noticing and aware of. One's around kind of value, I suppose, and the one's around connection. So the one in terms of value is around actually in lots of different ways. So value in terms of, and Graeme, you mentioned this, around actually what's important to us, and actually can we do this better and more efficiently because we've got so many other things to do. It's given everyone a really laser focused view of what matters to the business and what matters to the individual in terms of the work that they're doing. So there's that kind of immediate value in terms of actually what do we need to get done, and can we do it? Can we do that online or remotely, and can we do it differently? So that's kind of one thing. Or are there things that we absolutely categorically have to deliver or do in person if you're key workers, and how can we do that kind of safely? So how can we? So, but it's given a laser focus to kind of what's valuable to businesses. And I think, and we'll come on to this later on, this is super important for people in terms of actually how we can use this to galvanise and sustain people, I think, in the longer term in terms of what we're doing. But that value is also associated with individuals in terms of actually what matters to them as individuals. So in terms of actually, you talked about, Michelle, the blurring the lines between home and work, and you start to realise actually how much elements of work, how important is it to you, and how are you juggling that with your home circumstances that we have. And I'm finding that different people, and I'm learning about the values of what's valuable to individuals by being invited into their homes, by realizing that they've got kind of caring responsibilities or whatever their personal circumstances are. And that's something I think is really important, that kind of value. And I think the other way that people are seeing value is maybe actually an individual perspective in terms of what they thought was important about their job. So some people, seniority and status all of a sudden isn't a signal that your job is valuable as effectively anymore. Actually, what's valuable is actually potentially making a difference to other people. So in this small example, I was chatting to a couple of people about this who work in supermarket delivery, so key worker, and someone who works in the kind of NHS. The NHS, I think at the moment, people have always kind of got a sense of appreciation for the value of the work they're doing, but they're saying it's never ever been so obvious. So people have kind of seen signs that they're wearing in supermarkets, shopping links, and have said, you come to the front of the till. Some people have volunteered to kind of pay for people shopping that when they've been out and about wearing their kind of NHS badge, and they're almost kind of hiding it now because they get really embarrassed about this in terms of, but they realise that all of a sudden that people are valuing what they're doing. But also shop workers. So in terms of the colleagues who were kind of replenishing kind of shelves locally from here, I was just having a conversation with someone, and they're saying, actually, I've never been so proud of the work that I do and realise how important it is within the community in terms of actually not only am I replenishing stock, which is vital, but also giving people the opportunity to understand that maybe the only point of social contact that person will have that week. And so therefore, actually, what they're seeing their job as in terms of value is not just stocking shelves, but also actually being a source of connection and community within the local area, which is something they'd never ever thought about in terms of their role. So I'm kind of seeing, so value is maybe something I'm seeing changing in lots of different ways.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Definitely. I think people are realising what's important, not that other things weren't important, but if you look at kind of a hierarchy of needs, then it's really focusing the mind on that. So great, thank you everyone. Next question, what do we think a post-COVID workplace will look like? Graham, do you want to go first? We'll keep it in the same order.
I think I'm in one. You know, we're never going to go back to the way we did things before. There will be elements of returning to offices, but I think for a whole host of reasons, we'll never go back. I'm going to take this from a slightly different angle than maybe you'd expect. I've seen some fascinating research about land values and property values. And the reason I've seen that is because I think I've seen Andy Mears on the call, and I was having this conversation with him last week to an extent where, you know, we're a huge landowner. I think we're about the 11th biggest landowner in the UK. So we've got a huge interest in what's happening with the value of land. So the theory is, because it doesn't matter where you are anymore, so it opens up the world of talent and all the rest of it, who the hell would want to live in a terraced house in London that costs 1.4 million? So I think what this research says is that we're going to expect to see quite a seismic shift in the value of properties. So we'll see, if you forget the recession where it's probably going to affect all property prices, but at a kind of comparison level, we'll see properties in big cities reduce, because why do most people live there? To go to work. Whereas we'll see property prices in really nice rural locations and really nice seaside locations go up, because actually that's where people really, really want to live, and they go and live in a city for a number of years to work to try and retire where they really want to live. So, and it's, when you say it, it's really obvious, but until I kind of read that research, it wasn't something that had occurred to me to the extent that this was suggesting it's going to happen. So I may be giving you a good tip here. You know, if you've got a property in a city, sell it. If you've got one in a seaside, keep hold of it. So, you know, we could be seeing some big changes, and it absolutely makes sense to me. You know, on a number of occasions, I've had roles where I've been London-based. I've managed to never have to move there. And the main reason for me was the property prices, and I have to live in a house that I didn't want to live in. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So I think we are going to see, we're going to see a huge shift in the way that people think about why they live in a particular location, which I think is a really good thing, actually, because we all know that many of our cities are overpopulated, polluted, and all the rest of it. Whereas, you know, we would have a much better and more balanced lifestyle if we actually lived where we would like to live where, rather than where we have to live. On top of that, I think we'll see office footprints of a lot of organisations decreasing substantially. I think we'll see when people do have to have face-to-face meetings, they'll probably rent a space. So we'll see office locations now turn into kind of rent a meeting locations of some description, I think, as we go forward. And I think finally the driving force behind some of this will actually be competition. Because if some organisations reduce their footprint and travel costs and hotel costs and all the other shenanigans around it substantially, then guess what? If you don't, and you try to go back to where you were before, then you're probably going to be unsuccessful in being efficient within your marketplace. So there's going to be an element of this being forced by what other people do.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Graeme. Michelle?
So yeah, I was reading something about San Francisco and how, you know, the Silicon Valley, the house prices around there are bonkers. And I think, you know, you mentioned before about Twitter saying everybody can move from home, you know, work from home until next year. But yeah, it's almost exciting how it's going to open that talent pool to so many more people. So there's loads of jobs in London that I would have loved to have taken, you know, gone for, but there's not a chance in hell that I'd want to live in London. Sorry for any Londoners. It's nice to visit, but I'm always really excited getting on the train on the way home, because it's like, oh, we're going to get some peace and quiet in the northeast now. And so yeah, I saw that research as well, Graeme, and it's interesting. Why would you go and live in a flat when you could have, I say this to all of our friends, don't we? It's like, for the price of your rent of your flat in London, your 1-bedroom flat, you could have like a 5-bedroom house rented in Pontyland if you really wanted to. So that's interesting. So yes, I'm a part of I'm on the board of the Association for Business Psychology, and really early days, we've had a number of organisations get in touch with us asking us about like bereavement counselling, to get some things in place just in case that, you know, the worst happens. And I think we've almost seen a lot of organisations caring a lot more about their staff, which hopefully is something that goes. And I think the flip with, you know, me, I could get a job in Silicon Valley, you know, in a year's time if I really wanted to, while working in Newcastle. I might have to sleep weird hours, but, you know, we can make it work. The flip side is that employer brand is going to be really, really important now, because any of your top people can just be taken away. So that empathy, compassion, that employee engagement, you know, sense of belonging is going to be really important for organisations going forward, because that's how you're going to attract the best talent. But yeah, remote hiring, I think we've been doing a really good job taking a lot of the hiring online already. So there's nothing that we couldn't do by hiring. So I've heard people being hired and onboarded completely remotely, and it's not been that difficult. So that's quite interesting as well. So imagine all of the money organisations have saved on getting all the right people to all the right location, and the amount of time and energy and effort people have saved not having to travel to London to interview people or be interviewed by people. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I'm quite excited about this new world. I bought a book. I was at a conference, the Association of Business Psychology conference in October, November last year, and a really interesting woman came on talking about flexible working. And I was like, oh, I love that book, you know. So I bought a book and I've like skimmed through it. It's on the pile of the 4,000 books that I have yet to read. And my overwhelming thought is, how can employers now say, oh no, you can't work from home because we need to monitor everything you're doing at every second of every day? That presenteeism, you know, it's gone. So that flexible working really opens up again to more talent and more opportunities for people. So it's exciting. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Just building on that, in terms of that flexibility, is around, actually, you need it from two perspectives. So one, actually, some workplaces, if you want to move back to a more kind of office-based model, a lot of people are saying within their footprint, they're only going to be able to manage a third of the workforce at one point anyway, in terms of being able to make sure that it's a safe environment for people in the next 12 months or so. So in order to stagger that, one approach is to be more flexible in terms of when people kind of come in to the office and work kind of where they are. And the second is maybe to be more flexible in terms of the hours that people work as well, so you can get people kind of coming in working in different shifts as well. So that's something I think in terms of that flexibility, kind of from one perspective. And the second, I think you're going to need flexibility also in terms of how people approach their jobs. So currently, a lot of people may have, before kind of pre-COVID or BC, as it were, I don't know, you have the kind of your fixed details of what your job will look like, and that's just been blown apart for a lot of people now. It's not for everyone, but for a lot of people. And I think the really interesting point in terms of flexibility is around actually how do you kind of build that back together again, or do you build it back together, and do you actually kind of recognise that maybe the future demands, building on Graeme's point, aren't going to be the same as your current demands in terms of what you're doing. And actually, how do you then get people to be flexible in kind of galvanising their talents, their interests, and putting them back together in a way that's going to meet the individual needs, to create that sense of belonging, Michelle, as you were saying, to create that sense of wanting to stay within the organisation, but also then meet the needs of the organisation as well, in terms of, and the customers or the consumers, whoever you're servicing within the work that you're doing, to be able to do that. So how do you bake that kind of entrepreneurial kind of ism into it? And one thing I think we'll probably talk about that I think we can't lose sight of organisation, we haven't talked about yet, but it's around kind of well-being. So looking at how we support individuals. I think if you're looking at this change in terms of this flexibility, or really getting people to think about doing things differently, you've got to kind of recognise that that taking change, delivering change, driving change, driving creativity, doing things differently, that takes a lot of energy from half of the individual, and that has to come from somewhere. And if everyone is crying out because they've delivered amazing things so far, and they're kind of looking at, they're empty effectively, haven't got anything else to give, then those organisations aren't going to tap into that. They're not going to be able to transform. And one of the things I think that we need to think about in terms of the near future is around well-being, not just to support individuals in terms of the acute problems they're suffering, Michelle, in terms of potentially bereavement, as you mentioned elsewhere, which I think we absolutely need to deal with that, but we also need to kind of hard bake well-being into what we're doing to sustain ourselves and other people, to be able to meet the needs of the business and themselves and the other side, if that makes sense. So just to kind of and I appreciate this is what I'll probably talk about in terms of these kind of things, a bit of a cliche here, but I think it's all these different aspects are really important. But you can't ignore what the makeup of what's going to be needed to help people to work in the way they're going to need in the future.
Absolutely, Rob. And I think people are going to need to check in, because people are remote. It won't always be as obvious what people are going through.
No.
Maybe easier to hide it and put that performance on for a Zoom call once a day or once a week. But checking in and seeing how people really are to avoid burnout is going to be really, really crucial.
I think that's just something, again, I just wanted to kind of just mention in terms of didn't get lost within this conversation. But yeah, absolutely. I think people are, you're saying people are, the remote side of things, that it's potentially, I hadn't thought about it in here, but people, is it maybe easier to hide and show up and put a smile on there, and smile, or not put your camera on, miss an opportunities to not to connect with people. And again, I think maybe, and Michelle said this in terms of leaders, and Graeme as well, the idea of being more empathetic and kind of connected with your workforce is probably going to be more important than ever.
Definitely. Great. Thank you, everyone. So next question, how do we feel that COVID has changed us as people professionals? Graeme, do you want to go first?
Thanks for that.
Well, we'll keep in the order that we started.
I'm not sure it's changed me in terms of my kind of professional kind of outlook or demeanour, to be honest.
Or what has it taught us?
I think it's changed my lifestyle, and I think what that's taught us is that, as I said before, we're capable of a lot more flexibility than we thought we were. I also think that it's the point I made earlier around the simplification. If we can deal with things that normally take a day and 2 hours, then we don't need to be sitting on Teams for 9 hours a day.
Yeah.
We can keep those meetings short and sharp, and then we can be off camera doing the work that we need to do in that kind of trusted way. So, you know, again, it's that kind of trust thing. Somebody, I think it was just mentioned before, I don't know if it was you, Rob, around kind of turning off your camera. So one of the deals that I've got with my team is that we keep the meetings short, but you keep your camera on. And that was something that we kind of agreed between us up front, because it was starting to wind people up a little bit. Someone was saying something and switching the camera off, and everyone was wondering where they'd gone. You know, if they'd gone to make a cup of tea, if they, you know, are they having a game of solitaire on the phone? Like, what's happening? Are they switched on or not? And we've probably all had those thoughts, but not said them at times. So that's kind of part of the deal. You know, you'll only spend a couple of hours a day on this thing, but when you're in the room, be in the room stuff. So, you know, concentrate on the conversation, be part of it, add to it, and then when it's finished, go off and kind of do whatever you need to do, whether it be doing some work or playing solitaire, don't care. But, you know, whilst you're on the camera, be with us in the room. So I think that's been quite important. The lifestyle thing, though, is I think incredibly important not to pass over too quickly. I think particularly for anyone who thinks we're going to go back in some way to kind of where we were. Lots of conversations where you say to someone on a camera, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" The answer will be, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then people tend to skip on to back on the business. So I think there's something about going, no, let's just have 5 minutes on this. You know, what's actually happening in your life? Are you managing to get the dog for a walk? How's the kids? Just having that conversation for 5 minutes, I think, is incredibly powerful in terms of people understanding that actually you kind of do care about how their life is, and you're not just asking the question because you need to ask the question. And things like that. I think, you know, everyone's evolving in the techniques in terms of how to deal with this stuff, because it's very different, and certainly I wouldn't want to jump to any permanent conclusions about what's going to work and what's not going to work, because, you know, we're 8 or 9 weeks into something that's going to be with us for quite a long time. You know, who knows? Maybe one day we'll work from the moon. So, you know, it's such a leap that I think we just have to keep open-minded about what we learn each day, each week, and keep kind of evolving in the way that we do this stuff. In 3 months' time, we might all be sick to death of this and need something different. I don't know. Or we might be perfectly happy that we can jump on our bike at 6:30 in the morning for an hour and walk the dog at lunchtime, and, you know, whatever floats your boat kind of thing. From a personal perspective, I think for about the last 20 years, with the exception of a couple of years where I was kind of having a rest, I've probably spent an average of 3 nights a week in a hotel. I was looking back on my diary in the kind of February, January this year, just to kind of test myself on what it looked like versus what it looks like now. And kind of what I found was pretty much that I was an idiot. So I found 1 week in February where I was actually on 10 trains in a week. On the Thursday evening, I got home at about 9 o'clock. I'd been in the Midlands for a couple of days, and I was on the fast train from Newcastle to London, the 7:06 or whatever the hell it is. Mm-hmm. I was on that the next morning, and I looked at my calendar. I just thought, what were you doing? And actually, that Friday, so door to door for me, so taxi from Washington, Newcastle, train from Newcastle to King's Cross, underground to Covent Garden, walk to the office on Strand. I was in a meeting for 2.5 hours. Then I walked back to Covent Garden, got the underground, back to King's Cross, train from King's Cross, taxi home. And I must have been out of the house like 11 hours or something for a 2.5 hour meeting. And when you look at that in the context of what we're actually doing now, you think, how stupid is that? So I'm not going back, and I don't think any of you want to.
Would you be willing to go back to that lifestyle?
I don't think any of us will, because it just doesn't make any sense. And even the cost involved in that, you know. Yeah. I mean, you all know how much the bloody train tickets are.
But Graeme, can I jump in here? Just to kind of sorry if I'm able to step in my mark here. But one of the things I think is interesting is in terms of, So my wife is interesting. Her job is kind of involves an element of working remotely, and she's found actually in terms of her connection with the leadership team and the management team, it's much more kind of equitable now in terms of one of the things that she's found in terms of kind of Skype meetings or Zoom calls is that there's more even distribution of voices heard in a way that actually when she goes to face-to-face meetings, that's not always the case. And one of the things that I'm interested in the future will be what will happen if not everyone necessarily does that. So if you elect for one or two people, we've all been in meetings probably where we've had 6 of us there and one person's dialing in, and for that person dialing in, it's not, the experience hasn't been as maybe as positive, or their voice hasn't been heard maybe as equally as the other people there. So it's going to be an interesting one to manage, I think, in the future, where you're going to have people who want to work kind of remotely, dial into meetings, but maybe some people are going to be face to face, and how you deal with those kind of issues. Is that, just to ask you a question, Graeme? So is that something you've thought about yet in terms of how you're going to operate in the future? You know, are you going to make a call between face to face or?
Yeah, we have, and you know, we haven't kind of made any final decisions, but the conversation's really around. I think we need some kind of guidance and governance for the organisation so that people are consistent. In any team, whatever the leader does, you know, we all know that others kind of feel obliged to do the same, and that's a problem, you know. So if there's an organisation with a chief executive who decides I want everyone in the office, then guess what happens? Everyone will go back to the office, and you know, lots of people will probably leave because they don't want to anymore. So we've talked around, you know, for example, do we have a face-to-face kind of board meeting once a month, and that's the only time we travel, or do we have that plus a face-to-face with your own team, and that's the only 2 times you travel, or do we only go face-to-face with a board meeting once every 3 months? And we haven't made any decisions, but that's the kind of conversations we're having. But if you take any of those answers, they're a million miles away from what we were doing and how we were acting and behaving and traveling and overnights and hotels and dinners all the time and God knows what else.
And the cost of that is enormous, isn't it? From travel, entertainment, eating on the train, you know, your lunch, it's a huge cost. Yeah,
and you know, as much as I kind of get on and like most of my colleagues, you know, I'd rather be at home with my family most nights than sitting in a restaurant in London talking about the same stuff I've been talking about all day. So I think that kind of balance of your life actually helps you to be much more switched on when you're actually kind of in the room of a relatively short call. You know, you're prepared better. You're kind of ready for it, and that's what we found. You know, the vast majority of people come into these things really well prepared because they want to get in, get it done, make a decision, decide what's next, and then kind of move off. And that's actually incredibly helpful.
Great, thank you, Graeme. Michelle or Rob, you want to go next? Michelle,
I can go. It's cool. So I think for me the biggest thing is I'm awful at asking for help, always have been. Miss Independent, literally I can do it on my own. It's pretty much going to be on my gravestone. And so when this hit, and having my little boy off school all the time, and you see all of these people going, you know, this is my homeschooling, and it was almost they're getting way more schooling on their, you know, all of a sudden all of these flipping, you know, houses had chalkboards in them all of a sudden, and you know, this is a schedule that I'm going to do my child, and like, well, I'm in the middle of a massive project, and now that, you know, the mum guilt has been added on like a million times because I'm not teaching my child how to speak Japanese, and quite frankly, the maths for a 10-year-old was like, what the hell is this? And
I hear you, Michelle.
Yeah, and it's almost that. So my ex-husband's wife is a nurse, so we decided really early on that we'd just keep Oliver here. And so we're like, yeah, we can do this. And initially it was quite fun, you know, it was all like mucking in and getting on, but it slowly died a bit of a, you know, painful death of stress and tensions and things. So we went from like, let's do this homeschooling to, you know what, if you do your homework a couple of hours a day, then you can go and play on your PlayStation, talk to your friends on your PlayStation, you know, read a book, you know, draw, whatever you want to do. And I think we got into a bit of a rhythm of that, but it was endless. It was never ending. And I think when the government decided that we can go out, but not out, or whatever it was, the latest, the latest uncertainty that they threw at us, it was almost too much. So we made the decision to Oliver go to State's Dad for a couple of weeks, and honestly, the headspace we've had from that, and the ability to just, look after ourselves. So I think looking after our own well-being is so important, and we literally will just fight on and fight on and fight on till we're almost at a point of can't cope anymore. So yeah, I think that's ask for help sooner, and make sure that you're looking after our own self-care. Hilariously, Rob and I did a little video really early doors all about this, but I'm really good at giving advice. Not necessarily the one that is really good at taking advice. So yeah, I think asking for help when you need it is really important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michelle. Rob?
So I think building in terms of asking for help, but I think giving advice as well. I think one of the things this has happened to everyone. It's a level playing field, so everyone has been kind of impacted on this. Maybe not in the same way, but maybe it's because of HR professionals, in particular, as you were saying at the start, and how it's kind of been so challenging for this as a group of professionals, but leaders kind of more broadly. We're all having to deal with this equally. And what's happening, I think, is nicely that I've seen about the idea of asking for help is that everyone is necessarily being more open about the challenges they're facing, because they're the same for everyone. It's not there's no secret sauce effectively associated with it. It's something that's kind of evenly distributed. And I'm seeing groups of people coming together and supporting each other on WhatsApp groups or webinars such as this or elsewhere, that maybe this wouldn't have happened if these circumstances hadn't come together. And people are being very open and able to kind of share ideas and offer support and guidance. And I found that kind of two ways. So for me, in terms of I found that people have been more accessible for me for kind of conversations to support me and help me, which is amazing. But also I found more people now coming to me to ask my advice or support about stuff, which I've been really helpful to give. But I've just noticed more of this is coming now at this current point in time. I think there's something that's happened that's make it maybe easier for people to do that for whatever reason. I hope that continues in the future, that we still have that kind of openness and opportunity to support each other. I think one of the other things that I've seen within HR professionals, and I'm seeing myself, is this idea of actually anything is possible. But I think some of the things that people have done have just been absolutely transformational in terms of from an organizational perspective. I've heard from stories in terms of how people are kind of recalibrating, reshaping their business, either because of the physical demands of working remotely or because of complete changing in terms of the kind of production needs, or potentially be able to support key workers in different ways. And I think if we can hold on to that stories, those energy, and understand actually how we operate as organizations, how we operate as leaders to enable that to happen, and then just think about actually what are all the things, the stories we've told ourselves that we can't do this as a business because it wouldn't work, it's not possible, etc., etc. All of a sudden, those kind of things that we've taken as being impossible become possible. And I'm excited by the idea of for HR leaders in terms of, and for people kind of leaders around actually how can they work with their employees and their organizations to kind of to start doing more of the impossible that they're excited about, that's going to support them and support other people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob. In crisis there's opportunity, they say, so it's going to be an interesting time. It's 1:45 now, so I'd just like to open up if anybody's got any comments or questions to the panel that we haven't covered, or anything they would like to add. Now would be a great time.
So we've got a couple in here, Nina. So a question from Andrew Silver. So we talked about the fact that we don't need to travel. We can have lots of conversations remotely. But what about things like poor performance, difficult conversations? How is everybody dealing with that sort of conversation?
Yeah. Any comments from anyone? Has anyone had an experience of that I'd like to share, good or bad?
I'm happy to start if you like. Certainly we've held dismissals over Teams, disciplinary hearings, grievances, whatever. So we've just kind of carried on as normal. Took some advice early on around, is that okay? Does it make a difference to anything? The answer is pretty much no. So as long as you use the same protocols that you usually use, there's no need to do anything different, really. So we just kind of carried on, and haven't found a particular difficulty with that.
Have you found any differences in outcomes or reactions, Graeme?
Not that we're aware of, no, nothing.
No. And what about managers? Are they comfortable doing it in teams, or has there been a bit of coaching needed to get over that initial?
I think the find it depends what kind of organisation you've got. We're kind of 50% white collar, 50% blue collar. It's probably fair to say, if anyone's ever seen the Boys from the Black stuff, so we've got quite a few of those in our organisation, and being candid about it, there's probably occasion where you'd rather not be in the room with one or two of those characters when you have that kind of conversation. So I think probably overall it's probably slightly easier for managers than actually being physically in the room. We've all got war stories in HR, kind of, in our early careers, particularly from years ago, where we were in fairly uncomfortable situations with someone in a room that we didn't want to be with. So if anything, it takes that angst away from the person.
Great. Any more questions or comments, James?
Let's go back. So follow-up comment. So it certainly could be more challenging, can't it? If it's on a screen, you're not actually with the person. I suppose there's positives and the downsides to that. I mean, I suppose if you know at 12 o'clock I'm being taken into such and such a room, which is, I know, the room everyone is taken into to be performance managed or let go, there's some kind of anticipation as to know what's coming. But if it's
the walk of shame,
I've got a Teams meeting at 10 a.m. tomorrow, but I don't really know what it's about. I don't know. That's something for my own reflection and career. So let's.
If I can just jump in there, I mean, I think the thing is, if you do these things, in the way, in my view, they should be done, then the individual would know exactly why they're going onto that Teams call. Okay. They would have some correspondence to say what it's about. They would have the kind of evidence pack if there's one, et cetera, just as you would normally. Okay. So there shouldn't be any surprises in those meetings at all.
Great. That makes good
sense. And has anybody found that people are dying to get back to work and really struggling with not being in the workplace and asking when they can go back? Because for some people, work as their family are a big part of their lives, and they thrive on everything that goes with it, whether it be that meeting and the overnight stay in the hotels. Anybody found anything?
So I think from my perspective, I think we're assuming a lot of people are making do at the moment, and I think in terms of their circumstances, so people are working from home, but they're maybe not doing it with the best technology, the best setup, the best kind of circumstances in terms of juggling lots of different things. So I think some people are kind of recognizing they're not able to do their kind of the best work, and I think. So some people are saying I'm missing the opportunity to go to the office from that perspective, in terms of connecting with other people on a face-to-face basis, but also just to have the right tools and the right environment to be able to do my job. Now, it doesn't mean to say they can't necessarily be replicated at home, but they're just not yet there. And I think one of the things we need to be really careful about, I think, in terms of assumptions, is assuming just we're making do at the moment, when I think everyone is making do by just rolling up the sleeves and getting on with it, whether that's sustainable and whether that's something that people can't do. So I know people are kind of doing work on their ironing boards, they've been kind of doing other loads of stuff, and it's just not kind of it's not something that's kind of viable for the future. So absolutely, and I think other things that challenges we have in terms of going back to the office life is that some people have the commute that they actually valued or didn't, or some people hated it. So some people think it's a plus, others saying actually I cycled, or it gave me the opportunity to listen to a podcast or read a book or do things that I couldn't ordinarily have done else kind of where. And it's how you're going to bake that stuff into your kind of current day-to-day experiences. So I think there's loads of stuff about working life traditionally that people are missing. And my kind of challenge, or my thing that when I'm talking to people individually or kind of as a group, to saying, what are the things you want to hold on to that you're really missing? If you're missing them, they're probably things you want to kind of see if you can replicate them, but also what are the things aren't you missing? So what are the stuff that actually you're super glad's not going, and make sure you don't kind of re-bring that back into the office or the way you're working in the future.
No, definitely. I think with the we know that my little boy's not going back to school until September at the earliest. So it's almost how do we put systems in place that, I can actually get on with my work and make money so I can feed my family, and so it's yeah, I miss school more than anything else, because my work environment, I work already in my attic, but it's almost the freedom to have some non-child time. I love him, I really do, but it got a bit relentless.
I read somewhere you're not working from home in normal circumstances. You're working from home and homeschooling and looking after pets, and you know, it's not just working from home or working remote.
And I don't think that's evenly distributed as well. So I think one of the things I read, it was something in today in the news, I think it was today or yesterday, saying actually that the women are taking up, kind of in the households, are doing an hour or two extra kind of childcare or responsibilities relative to male partners. So I think one of the things, again, organisations need to be careful about or thinking about is actually, are we evenly distributing in terms of the voices that you're hearing, the people you're rewarding in terms of the work they're doing, and is it actually you are allowing certain behaviours that for people, because of their circumstances, to deliver the work that aren't available to other people because of maybe their gender or their individual circumstances. So that's something I think we need to, hopefully organisations are kind of being careful about and reflecting on, because I know that there was also people to do more of things and feeling guilty about it, that they can't because they haven't got the caring side of things sorted out, or they're not, for whatever reason, it's not being evenly shared within their home environment for whatever reason.
Yes.
And then we were talking to somebody, I can't remember who it was now, who was saying that there's a big almost resentment building too. So those people on furlough, I'm sure you've seen all the memes, you know, there's the tanned ones and there's the non-tanned ones, and you know, all the people that aren't on furlough, not necessarily, they're doing lots and lots of extra work, and those who are off. So it's that, how do you manage almost that transition from furlough into work again and keep, you know, stop that resentment building up? I think that's a question I'll probably want to ask Graeme. What's he doing about that? Sorry.
I think the biggest worry for those who are on furlough increasingly in a lot of organisations is, will I ever go back? Will my job still be there? I think initially it was quite a lot of people quite glad to have a holiday, you know, 80% pay, you know, different organisations have topped up or not topped up, but, you know, regardless, if you treated people relatively well, they were okay, because, you know, normally the expenditure levels had gone down because there's no restaurants to go to, pubs to go to, sporting events to go to, etc., etc. So actually there was kind of less opportunity to spend money. So a lot of people were quite happy with initially with that opportunity that maybe they hadn't had before to have some time off. I think that's quickly kind of morphed into more of a worried phase. You know, the unfortunately tuning into the BBC News, etc. Hear lots of kind of stories around what's happening with the economy. Start to hear about unemployment levels are going to go up, and immediately go into this kind of phase of, I really want to go back to work, because if I'm in the last tranche of people who are furloughed, maybe, you know, they're going to realise they don't need me anymore.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's an element of truth in some of that. You know, lots of organisations have been operating in a lesser capacity than normal, but with an even more reduced workforce, and being able to cope. And because of all the things we talked about, the effectiveness, you know, wasted time on trains and all the other stuff, actually, I think organisations will go forward with, generally speaking, less people than they had before to try to deliver the same stuff. If their market's gone down 10% or 15%, or God forbid even 20%, then, you know, guess what? The reductions they're probably going to make in the number of people is going to be bigger than that. So I think it's really important to try and keep in touch with those who are furloughed, and make sure you understand how they're feeling. But that said, it's not like you can make any promises. So it's for me, it's incredibly important that there's an honesty that comes into that conversation about, we don't know what the future holds. You can't go into these conversations with the sole intention of making people feel better, because that's just sugarcoating the inevitable kind of bad news that could come. If I look at our organisation, you know, we're trying desperately hard to forecast what our markets are going to look like, and I'm sure you're all in exactly the same boat, just in very different ways. And the output of that will determine what you do in terms of your workforce. Now, at the minute, if you've got kind of estimating here and guesstimating here, I think most of us are probably more towards the guesstimating end. And I think that's why it was incredibly helpful that the furlough scheme was extended, and we're all waiting with bated breath to see what it's going to look like from the 1st of August, because I think that will drive what we all do in terms of our response to that. If the government kind of, as has been speculated by some of the press, say you now have to pay 30% plus the NI contributions, then I can see a lot of organisations at that point going into consultation process to reduce the workforce. If it was, we're going to keep going with the way it is until October, then more companies would hang on, and there's clearly a balance in between. But I think there's a fear within Whitehall, certainly because we get involved in quite a lot of lobbying stuff through big industry bodies. There's a fear that actually furlough will just be keeping alive jobs that are already dead, and we may as well just kind of deal with it now and use the money that we'll save on that to try and generate new jobs rather than hang on to ones that have already died. And I do think there's some truth in that. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question. I don't think we know.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's a day by day, week by week kind of reevaluation of where we all are, and we all have to take the decisions, unfortunately, for the good of our own organisations. But when we add them all up, there's no doubt in my mind that's going to have quite a consequence for the economy.
And it's all that leading through uncertainty. So my coach says it's that, that military term VUCA, in action. So we really don't know what's going on, and it's make the best decisions with the information you've got. And for those people who really like to have all the information and really think about it, it's almost by the time you thought about it, the world's moved on. So it's, you have to make the best decision at the right time. That it might have to change tomorrow, but it's almost, we have to sort of let go of some of our ego around that as well, Yeah,
and I think just to add to that point around, I think in terms of clarity, in terms of the furlough and things, we can't give people crystal ball clarity. What we can do is give them clarity in terms of how we're going to keep them communicated with them and how we're making decisions as an organisation in terms of the best decisions that we're making. Michelle, as you were saying there, they may not be may not be the ones that we're going to stick to forever, but if we're being clear in terms of when or how we're making those decisions, when we're going to communicate them, that's the best we can possibly do at the moment. I think to try and do as best as we can to control the uncertainty of this by putting in place clear guidance, clear idea frameworks in terms of when and how we're going to communicate with these people and engage them, and that's the best I think we can possibly do at the moment, in my view.
We've got a couple of minutes, so if anybody's got any burning questions or comments that they want to put in, we've got some great questions and comments coming through. Now would be a good time if you can type quickly. I know we're trying to keep to the schedule of 1 o'clock, but I think we could probably talk for the next 2 hours around
We could probably talk, yeah. Now, one thing just from my perspective, I'm going to have to dash out in a minute's time. This has been an amazing privilege for me to be part of it as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Me too. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks.
So this is all going to it's recorded, and we've got some really good information in the chat.
Yeah, we'll share all the links to any TED Talks or book suggestions, etc. We've really enjoyed it. Thank you to our panel. Thanks everyone for joining.
Great to see all the faces, and I hope everybody's well despite all the challenges.
If there are any other burning topics that you think you'd like some answers to, do let us know. Get in touch, and we will see what we can do about bringing a great panel together for you. So thanks everyone.
Yes.
Thanks Graeme. Thanks Rob. Thanks Nina.
Thank you.
Very useful.
Bye.
Bye.
See you all. Thanks everyone. Thanks for being part of it. Bye.